People need to find meaning in something. They need to believe in something.
Second law of thermodynamics is good, and pretty irrefutable that the universe is hurtling inexorably towards entropy.
If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast?
Absolutely. Jason Göbel, former member of Cynic, Monstrosity, Gordian Knot, and Portal.
Excellent. So this is extremely unlikely. You are in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia right now on a bit of a walkabout, bit of a spiritual quest. So right off the bat, I need to give thanks to my friend Alex Dela Cruz from the In Dark Purity zine, who hit me up and let me know that you were in town. And I've been a fan of your music since I was about 19 years old. You know, I've been reading about the Focus album for years, and I found it used one day. This was before the reissues, and I found it used at a CD shop, and I just grabbed it. And you know, we'll talk about Cynic in a little while, but you know, at the time, I was 19 years old. This would have been 1998, and there was very little in the realm of death metal and extreme metal that wasn't in my wheelhouse or wasn't, you know, consumed with just absolute glee. And you know, at the time, there's nothing like that album that I'd ever heard before. And even now, it's a very, very unique and very forward-thinking album. So I'd like to spend a lot of time talking about that and how it came about. But I guess let's start with you. What was your background? How did you get involved with music?
Wow, I just kind of grew up around music. I had young parents. My mom was always listening to music, always playing music on the radio. And I just remember as a kid listening to music and I was never, it never made me want to dance. I always wanted to dissect it. I was always like, wow, what's that? Okay, that's drums. What's that lower tone there? Okay, that's a bass, and I just started to really dissect music. And my brother was the same way. My brother's a bass player, and he ended up around 12 years old grabbing a bass, and he had a guitarist friend, and they needed a drummer. And they talked my family into get me a little drum set around 8 years old, and let's say that lasted about a month. I'm definitely not meant to be a drummer. And I actually I was debating between trumpet and guitar when I was young, as far as just hearing those instruments that I liked. And then I realized that trumpet was linear. It was a one-note type instrument at a time, and I wanted chords and all that. And so I decided to go with guitar. Actually, around 1978, 79, in the States, when they had concerts, they used to put commercials on TV. And Kiss was coming into town, and I remember shooting fire and blood and smoke coming out of the guitars, and I'm like, that's it, man. That's what I want to do. So I for my birthday, asked for a guitar, and that was kind of the beginning of the end there, I guess, if you put it that way.
Were the first songs you learned to play Kiss songs?
I took one lesson. There was one lesson. I had a guy come by the house. My parents brought him over, and he showed me how to hold the guitar, proper hand positioning. I think wrote down a major and blues scale, and then showed me a few open chords. I think one of the first songs I learned was from Styx. I think it was like Sweet Madam Blue or something like that, and I learned a couple two-jobber bar chords. And then then it was I think it was like Calling Dr. Love and some of those classic Kiss songs, but that was just a time where there was some really good music on the radio and some really good rock. And actually the first song I really learned was on one string, the song that everybody learned, Smoke on the Water. That was really the first one there, but then when I got into chords was like some of the Kiss songs and Styx and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's either Smoke on the Water or Iron Man, right?
Yes.
One of the
yes,
yeah.
That's it. Iron Man was a close second there coming into it for sure.
That's interesting to me though, because I think throughout your career you've been known as a guitarist who's it's always been rock, but not full on rock. Like there's always been kind of a jazz flavor to a lot of the bands you've been involved with. When did that influence start coming into your life?
Okay, well, it's interesting. We were from the Florida death metal scene, but we were from Miami. We weren't from Tampa or Orlando, where the real, metal bands were coming out. So I'm half Cuban, I'm half American. So there was Latin influence. There was just a lot of multicultural music going on. So, and I grew up, like I said, my mom was always playing music. I loved disco. I loved Motown, so I was always open. And I still say it to this day, in every style of music, there's good music and there's bad music, so good music is good music. So I was always very open. But my real roots really were in classic rock. And that's where it started. And I kind of got, as I progressed as a guitar player, I started to get bored of just the standard progressions, and I started, to want more and to delve into different styles. And that's when the jazz came in. But it was actually a little later in our life. I was already in my late teens. I was already, I'd say the guys that I had with Cynic had already met. And we were, I guess, a progression from classic rock to the heavy metal to the death metal and all that was also trying to push myself as a guitarist. Okay. So I just would get bored of classic, and I I need something a little heavy, a little faster, something a little more demanding, and went to metal, and then it started going to, and I did the the Metallicas and the Megadeths and Metal Churches, and then it just kind of progressed from there. And I think when I got into when we were all playing in Cynic and we were all pushing each other, we at one point had really hit the point where we were like, we've kind of done everything we can do with the standard metal playing. And that's when we, actually Sean Paul and I decided to sign up at Miami-Dade Community College. And I remember looking, it was classical or jazz was your two options. And I remember walking by and looking at the teachers, and the classical teacher was sitting with the student, and he had a little ruler, and it was like, your hand positioning is wrong. And it was just really like rigid, and and I looked over because it was an open room, and then they had a soundproof room in that room. And in that room was the jazz teacher.
Right.
He had long hair, he was like chilling and grooving, and I'm like, that looks open, that looks cool. And I like the openness of jazz, the no rules and the different, play the same chord 5 different ways to get different tonal, So I was like, I think that's for me. So we signed up and started taking some jazz lessons, and that really opened up a lot of doors. But on the same note, we were already starting to listen to jazz. We were, like I said, Motown and all that. You've got a lot of jazz chords in there. So I think our heads were already there. And since we had also the Latin influence, I have a uncle on my Cuban side that played with all of the greats. He was a trumpet player in Cuba, but he decided not to defect. So as Paquito de Rivera, Arturo Sandoval, all these guys started coming out and coming over to Miami, he stayed back, but there was still that influence. So I think it was just being open to music and open to other styles also that kind of led to the jazz influence and us ending up studying that style a little bit.
Okay. How did you meet those guys?
That's a fun one. My brother was in a band also, and I did the high school bands with him, and I would sing for the bands. I was always playing guitar, but for example, in one of the bands that we were in, the guitarist played guitar better than I did, but he wanted to sing. I sang better than he did, but I wanted to play guitar, So I had ended up getting out of those bands, and I was playing myself, and that's when I was getting into the heavier music and starting with the Metallicas and those styles. And we used to have keg parties in Miami, and they'd go way out into the country, out in the outskirts of the city, and they'd line up 10, 12 bands and just play all night. Well, I went to support my brother because he was playing, and it was Cynic's first show. It was Paul, Sean, Mark Van Erp, who was from Monstrosity, and a gentleman named Jack Kelly was singing. And I remember they went on before my brother, and I watched them play, and I was like, oh wow, there's finally someone playing something that I like, or I didn't know anyone in that scene. Most of the guys I knew were in kind of the rock scene, and I was hating it, and the big hair and all that stuff, the glam stuff, I was hating it. So I didn't really have any contacts. Well, my brother, as Cynic actually was breaking down, and my brother was going to set up to play, he goes to Paul and Sean, he goes, guys, are you looking for another guitarist? He goes, my brother loves playing that pissed off shit that you play or something like that, and he's a pretty good guitar player. And they go, actually, we are looking for another guitarist. So after he played, he walked him over to me, and Sean and Paul and I, we talked a little bit. The next day I went out to the warehouse, we jammed a little bit, and pretty much joined the band right there.
Okay. Was this around like 87, 88?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be right around that time, yeah.
So this was after the demo, or?
This was after the first demo.
Right,
Yeah, the
right,
first
right.
demo was,
Yeah.
it was right after they recorded it.
What did I expect? slaughter in my brain. Boiling hate devours my sanity. I shall never be the same. Give up, think that I am known. All me, what can I expect? But don't talk, I'm a reality. Goddamn, scarred as today.
Speaking for myself, I'm familiar with the Florida scene mostly around the Tampa and the bands that came out of Tampa.
Yeah.
What was going on in Miami, and how much of the stuff coming out of the other parts of Florida were you hearing?
You know, we were hearing everything coming out of the other parts of Florida. You know, back then it was the fanzines, the tape trading scenes, and all that. And of course, you know, you had, like you said, a lot of those bands were coming out of Florida. But at the time, we didn't know that that was anything special. Those were just the guys that were kind of within our reach, and it's what we were listening to. And I mean, I remember Nocturnus and Morbid and going to see Amon before they were Deicide, and, you know, and just, it was like just the bands that were playing around. And then in our area, there was even, Ambugalard, there was, there was a few other bands that were kind of coming out of the Miami scene that were a little bit more thrashish, and but we were just kind of always had our ear to the ground, and of course Tampa was producing, mostly Tampa. I mean, Chuck and Orlando, that's where it was kind of coming from. So we definitely were familiar and were listening to everything that was going on, but we were just 4 hours away from that scene.
Yeah. Paul and Sean were sort of drafted into Death for the Human album, but you guys were already recording and writing songs at that time. Cynic was already an established band, even though I don't think you guys had a record contract. But
no,
yeah.
So the problem was we couldn't get signed.
Okay.
Everyone that we shopped our music to said that we were too technical. You're not memorable. It's not catchy enough. You have too many rhythms, you know, in the song and all that. So, but we kind of had a hype going in the scene, at least in the local scene. And one of those hypes was that we could play our instruments, that we were proficient on our instruments. So, at one point, we actually had contacted Chuck, and we were heading to Orlando. It's a vague thing, but we actually went over and met him. And hung out, and you know, it was just an honor to meet him and all that, and got to know him a little. And then we played a lot at a club called the Cameo in Miami Beach, and a lot of the big bands would come and play there. Well, they needed opening acts to play, because there was longer shows. You know, they'd start at 4 or 5, and then it would go until you got to the big bands. And we had played there a few times, and they knew that at least our set was tight, that we would come in and play. And so whenever we heard a gig was coming in, we'd call them up and say, yo, you need an opening act, and, you know, they would let us in. So that's where we played with, you know, like Sacred Reich and you know, bands like Chuck's Death. And so we had kind of met some of those people through the scene. So then Chuck needed a drummer. And, of course, we had a little contact, and he decided to bring Sean on. And then in the mix, I think Paul also got brought in. I think it was originally he was looking for a drummer, and then Paul also got pulled into the mix on that. And at that time, we were recording demos, and we were, of course, trying to get signed. Well, one of those times that we were recording a demo at Morris Sound, we were in the B room. Well, Pestilence was in the A room. And so we met Pestilence, and they're not from our neighborhood, of course, as we all know. But, you know, we hit it off with Patrick and all that, and that's kind of where the contact with Tony Choi and going and playing with Pestilence. Now, Atheist also, Atheist, another technical band in the scene, so that was a connection for us right off the mat. And, of course, with the sad loss of Roger Patterson, that kind of led with already being a technical band, being friends. You know, we supported them, they supported us. That also led to the opportunity of Tony playing with Atheist. And then Monstrosity, Mark Van Erp was our original bass player. Lee and I remember when Corpse George came into the scene. He was from Maryland, if I'm right, and I remember meeting him at a show, and he's just a personality and the neck. You never forget the neck, you know. And then John Rubin. Malevolent Creation is originally from Buffalo, but they had also moved down to like Fort Lauderdale, so they were playing there. And who kind of came down with them and ended up a couple warehouses down from us was Rob Barrett when he was doing Solstice, and so it was just like this whole melting pot of players. So then Monstrosity said, "Hey, we need a guitarist. Would you mind playing on the album?" Great friends. I was like, absolutely. It'd be an honor to get an album under my belt. I hadn't had one yet. So these opportunities kind of came in. First was Death, and then I'm not sure if it was Pestilence or Atheist first for Tony, and then Monstrosity. So we actually sat down as a band and we said, listen, we're not getting signed. You know, we're not getting. We've got a bit of a hype, but we're not getting signed. So let's take a break. Let's take these opportunities. But these opportunities we're doing because we want to get more exposure so we can get signed as a band. So it was an open, spoke of plan that we were going to go play with these guys and then try to come back and use that hype to get signed with Cynic. And that's what kind of happened. The challenge with that at the end, I guess, was the loss of Tony Choi in that process. So we went and we all did these albums. And then Roadrunner Records, reluctantly, they still told us, not catchy, not memorable. You know, I mean, this is the whole same thing. And they reluctantly were interested in telling us, you know, hey, let's do an album. And when we talked to Tony about it, he was working, I think, with Pestilence. He was over in Europe, and we're like, okay, when you finish the tour, come back, and we're going to do this. And he decided that he was making money with them and said, listen, you guys finish the album and I'll come in and I'll throw my bass lines down. And we said, no, that's not the plan. You know, the whole plan was we're going to do this together and it's all or nothing. So that was kind of the loss of Tony Choi. And I guess let me back up. So Roadrunner was interested. They said, you know, Monty Connor told us flat out, I don't really care for your music, you know, and it's fine. I respect that on him, you know. His job is to find bands that sell. And he didn't see that in us. So they said, we'll pay for the 1991 demo. Roadrunner will pay for it, and then you give that to us, and that's going to be the deciding factor if we sign you. And we ended up doing that with Scott Burns, and Choi was on that. And that is what they ended up signing us off of finally, but it still was a reluctant offer.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned these bands, Pestilence, Atheist, Nocturnus, and in retrospect you can say this is the beginning of progressive death metal, this is the beginning of tech death. But at the time, that didn't exist. Those terms didn't exist.
And I don't think we really knew we were doing it.
Yeah. But it's interesting because around that time, so if you say between 91 when you recorded that demo and 93, I guess, when Focus came out?
Yeah.
Corona started doing, and Corona wasn't really a death metal band, but they were within a similar tech thrash kind of sphere.
Right.
And Dark Angel did an incredibly, 240 riffs or whatever that album was supposed to have. Technical, progressive, kind of ambitious album.
Yeah.
And so there was a kind of sea change going on in the genre. And I think Monty Connor probably had his ear to the ground and realized that, Megadeth was one of the biggest bands in the world, and Megadeth also had this extraordinary guitarist as their frontman. And so he probably realized that whether or not he personally liked it, whether or not the Deicide fans or the Cannibal Corpse fans would like Cynic. And I've heard stories that the audiences weren't always...
We can talk about that, absolutely.
Weren't always that warm towards Cynic. But there was an appetite, there was a growing audience for a more, I like to say, a more forward-thinking, a more, maybe, not to be pretentious, but like a more intellectual or kind of thoughtful kind of death metal.
Yeah, and I think that with all those bands, the same thing that there's only so much you can do with power chords and straight blast all the way through, and so I think it was almost, I don't want to say it wrong, but almost a boredom and we wanted more, and again, I don't think that we were trying to be technical to be technical. I think that we were just trying to stay excited with the music and then push ourselves musically and kind of take it the next step. But I don't think any of the bands were conscious in a sense, or at least maybe they were and I was the ignorant one and wasn't, but it was just, I think it was a natural progression. And if you look at those bands too, none of them were really new. They'd already been playing a while. We had already been doing a lot of stuff for a while. So to keep us stimulated, there needed to be natural progression. And I think that's kind of what happened.
Within death metal, there is a fair amount of stigmatizing for bands that are considered technical, and it's something that I kind of understand, but I I feel it's a little bit hypocritical, because if you listen to a Cryptopsy song or a Morbid Angel song or any of these bands that you consider brutal, the sheer amount of musicianship to play at that level, whether it's the drumming or the guitar playing, is so extremely high. Like, you don't walk off the street and, you know, like the guy who learned Smoke on the Water 3 months ago is not going to be able to play a Cryptopsy song.
Absolutely.
And so death metal is this strange genre where, on one hand, there's snobbishness about people being too talented, but at the same time, you have to have that level of expertise in order to play music.
Yeah, there has to be some proficiency on the instrument to play it, and that's where the passion came in, you know, and that's where it just you couldn't imagine how many hours I just sat in a room and I played, you know, and we didn't go out and party Friday night, you know. I mean, we'd go to practice every day and we'd jam, and then sure, you would party a little after practice, but we weren't heading out and doing the typical thing. It was a lifestyle, you know, and you really you just had to love it to do it, and I think that's what happened, and maybe some of that snobbish just came from those guys knowing how much they'd worked to get there, you know, and so yeah, it's I'd hate to say it, but I could see where some of that could come from in the industry.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to the album being released, because by that point, people were familiar with Paul and Sean through the Human album.
Correct.
And I think Human, I mean, I'm not really that, it escapes me who put out albums first. So I know Human came out about 93. Is that right?
Yeah, now you're getting out of my realm, because I was never good at dates, and which, you know, I couldn't even tell you which one they played on, or, you know, half the time. But I would think Human came out a little, maybe 92, I would think, because if Focus came out in 93 and they already played on it, I would think, at least 92.
Okay.
Guessing.
So by 93, Cynic had already been established as, people were aware of who Cynic was.
There was a hype for sure, yeah.
So you released the album, and I think first we need to talk about, there's a change between the 91 demo and the 93 album, which you guys were already, you know, too technical for some people, maybe too melodic for some people, and then you added another element which made people, which rubbed some people the wrong way, which was the vocoder vocals. How did that come about?
Well, actually, Paul was singing the death metal, or the growling vocals, however you want to call it, and he had developed a nodule on his vocal cords, and they told him, if you keep doing this, you're going to lose your voice, and so that's how, I guess, for the album, we ended up with Tony Teagarden on the heavy vocals. But we were progressing dynamically in the music, and also with adding the vocals, we started adding the clean parts, and we got guitar synths and all that. So we wanted to add another dynamic and not just be a growling band. But then we didn't want just a straight melodic. We didn't want your Queensryche opera, you know, and it was like, which way could we go to add a little bit of dynamic and change things a little bit? And we had come across the vocoder, which no one knew about at the time. I mean, it was like, now it's a lot of people are using it, and it's pretty popular, I think, in some of the rap music and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, I think people, you know, again, everything in retrospect, right? Like, you've got the T-paid vocals, you've got the harmonizer, and all these things that you associate with, like, pop music and rap music and stuff like that. But you guys were doing it in such a different context that I don't think anybody inside of death metal knew what to make of it. And I definitely don't think anybody who'd never heard death metal before would hear that album and understand what was going on, and how unique and how different that was.
Yes, and again, we never really identified ourselves with the straight, like the Tampa scene and all that. We always just saw things a little differently as far as how we approached our music. So we really didn't care, in a sense, as far as that dynamic. and we were just trying to create some music that was resonating with us. And one of our big things wasn't to be technical or anything. We wanted to be original. But one of the things we never wanted to do was sell out.
Right.
And we wanted to play what we wanted to play. And that was, our goal was to get an album out and play exactly what we wanted to play and not sell out. So again, I just think we were looking for something different. We were kind of getting, again, bored with that dynamic of the death metal, that it's just all growl, all growl, all growl. And it was the best option out there without going, because same thing with the melodic vocals and all that. It's kind of been there, done that. It wasn't anything new. So we had found the vocoder, we tried it out, and we just thought it's kind of cool, and just I guess didn't care and just went for it. I don't know if that properly answers the question.
Yeah, no,
but,
absolutely. And I think that's maybe what I'm realizing is because you were a little bit outside of the death metal scene in terms of what was going on in Tampa, because you can, I can, pick 5 or 6 albums that I have that came from that region, and it's always going to be, some version of Scream Bloody Gore, some version of Butchered at Birth, Cannibal Corpse, some version of Ultras of Madness. It's a lot of those bands were following very closely what the bands that came before them did, and Cynic didn't. And I think it's interesting that you use the word sell out, because I think we think of selling out in terms of becoming more mainstream, becoming more melodic, becoming more whatever. But I think in the context of 91 and 93, the easiest thing to do would be to just put out another Obituary album, put out just another Death album, and
And we could have done that easily. And it was, we weren't thinking of it as selling out as becoming more mainstream. It was also selling out as becoming more just straight death metal, because it had been done. I mean, I guess we were always really hard on the music. We were hard on things like that in the sense that it was a diplomatic band. So we would get in there and we'd come in and we'd present music. For example, I'd come in and I'd present a riff, and we'd all listen to it, we'd play it, and then if one of the guys goes, dude, it sounds too much like Watchtower, or it sounds too much like Death, or it sounds too much, that riff was just thrown to the side, and you put your heart and soul into writing your music, and then it just gets flipped off like nothing. It was a painful process that we would go through, but that's the level that we held ourselves at. And it wasn't that it was, again, necessarily trying to do something different. We just wanted what we were doing to be original, to be our sound. So if it sounded like anybody else, or it sounded like any other band or style of music, we threw it away. I tell people the amount of music that went onto the Focus album was quite a bit, if you were counting, just how much music was on there. But we threw away 2-3 times that music just to get those riffs that made it onto the album. You know what I mean? And in that sense, that's I guess where I would refer to the selling out, was in both directions.
Yeah. You kept a very high standard for yourselves.
Yeah, we were very competitive within, and it wasn't with other bands. We were competitive within ourselves, and same thing, I would come up with something cool or new, and Paul would be like, yo, that's cool, let me learn it, and he'd, climb up, and then he'd come up with another, some awesome scale or something, and I'd be, bro, let me learn that, and we'd always be pushing ourselves musically to just being more proficient and being better players.
So, Monty Connor signs you, produces your demo, releases Focus begrudgingly. Once the album is out, what is the reaction?
Okay, well, let me back up. Monty Connor paid for it, had nothing to do with producing it.
Okay, sorry.
And I would love to throw a prop to Scott Burns. If there was any producing that went on, Focus would not have happened without Scott Burns. He was really the man that had made the sound. Okay, so the question was what was the response as far as... You know, it was mixed. It was very mixed. A lot of people to this day say that the album was a little bit above its before its time, and the people that got Focus in the beginning was the musicians. They were the ones that were playing guitar and are playing instruments, and they heard it, and then they tried to play it, or they understood, wow, you know, kind of what went into it, and what we put out in an album, but the listeners didn't quite get it, you know. And I think that as a musician, you develop your ear. It's natural ear training. So you had a lot of guys that had the ear for death metal, but didn't have the ear because, you know, we were using, of course, different type of chords. We were playing more dissonant and, you know, creating pushes and pulls and tension and release, and they were used to just the bar chords and everything like that. So it was a mixed result, but we got a great result from other musicians and other players, but the actual fan listening, just the music listening base, it took them a little while. It was an album that you had to listen to 4 or 5 times to just go, okay, now I'm hearing where they're going, and then once you start to hear it, then it started to sound good. But I in listening to a lot of jazz and fusion, it was the same way. You'd have to listen to it. You got to give it a chance, man. Listen to it, and then you hear the little magic in there. So it was very mixed. It was a very mixed response.
Were you touring off of Focus?
We did tour off of Focus, yeah.
Who were you opening for?
So, again, we didn't get the support from Roadrunner. Okay. And it wasn't, you know, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Monty or anything bad. You know, Monty Connor was a good A&R rep. I'm not sure if he's still working or not, but he at least, when we were working with him, was a good A&R rep, and he was doing his job properly. Yeah. They didn't know how to bill us. You know, they didn't know who to put us with. And we were originally going to tour with, I think it was Believer, and some other band. And I think Believer was like a Christian metal band or something, if I remember correctly. And it just wasn't going to be the best setup for us. And now when you tour, you get on a bus, and with death metal, you don't have a big budget, so if you do get a tour bus, there's at least 2 bands on there. And you're on there for months on that bus. And as we call it, that bus becomes a pressure cooker. So if you don't like the people that you're touring with, it becomes really uncomfortable because you're in a close proximity all the time. And we started off on the European tour, and same thing, when we were recording one of the demos, I'm not sure if it was the 91 demo or what it was, when we were recording one of the demos, Pestilence was in the other room, and that's where we kind of made contact with them. So we were talking with them, and they actually invited us to tour with them, because as a headliner, you do have some choice in who you get to play with. So they were kind enough to offer us the tour, and we jumped at it, and thank God, Roadrunner allowed it, and that's how we got on the Pestilence tour. That was a bittersweet tour, because they ended up breaking up halfway through the tour, and half of it just got cut off. We were actually supposed to come to parts of Asia, we were supposed to do Middle East, and we pretty much did, main Europe area, but as far as touring and all that, great guys, and it was a great opportunity, and it was the best opportunity we had to tour. Same
so this
thing.
this was after the Spheres album came out. Is that right? Or
Which album was it? See, that's where I'm so bad. It may have...
because I think those 2 albums came out around the same time. I think Focus and Spheres, which was almost like Pestilence's version of Focus, came out around the same time.
Yeah, and who was playing bass with them? Because it wasn't Choi when we toured. Man, it's been so long, I have to be honest with you. I don't remember.
Okay,
I'm sorry about that. There's some fans listening to this that know the dates and got it perfect too. But I mean, long story short, it was just an opportunity to play with another technical band, and that was in the scene, and that had popularity, and that was bigger than us, and was going to give us the opportunity to get some exposure. And then the U.S. tour, same thing. Cannibal being from Buffalo, but I always think of them as a Tampa band, and so many people do. They've relocated, they live there. Rob Barrett with Solstice was a fellow warehouseman. He was just a couple warehouses down. Absolutely wonderful friend to this day of mine. And
so when you say the warehouse, I've seen some like VHS footage of like bands whose rehearsal spaces was literally like these crates, where they would just set up crates. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so we basically went to a standard warehouse, and you can rent, it was just a big rectangle box.
Yeah, exactly.
And we went to behind the grocery stores, and we stole hundreds of crates, and then we went to construction sites, and we stole plywood, and then we went to we would pick up carpet off the street, wherever carpet we found that was just thrown out. So we'd stacked all the crates, we put the plywood on top, and then we nailed the perimeter, around to hold the crates in place. We put the carpet on top, nailed the carpet on. We made a riser and a stage, and we put that in that space, and that was our stage. And then we actually had built a loft. So by the time we were done, our warehouse, and again, we were at it for a while. We were very serious. We paid our rent, so it was our space. You would walk in, and we had put a bathroom. It had a bathroom. We put a makeshift shower. We had a little space that had a little microwave and a fridge and all that. Room for Sean's drum cases and stuff. And then you had the stage. And then halfway there was a ladder, and went up, and we built a loft, and we had couch and TV, and we practically lived there,
That's
that
amazing.
was our home. Sean's sister's husband, Sean Reinert's sister's husband, was a carpenter. So he said, yeah, if you guys, do the work and all that, and just pay me a little bit, I'll help you build a loft up there. And he built it, and same thing. We stole some carpet on there, or not stole it, just picked the carpet we picked up off the street. And I mean, literally, we'd be driving down the road, and you'd see someone that put a couch out on the side of the road, and that we'd pick it right up, and that was our couch. And so it was I guess that DIY style of doing it. But yeah, that's how you did it back then. You just, because what would happen is it would rain real hard and you could get water flooding in. So those crates just at least lifted everything a foot off the ground, and then you'd double it so the drums were up one more crate high, and you had a stage, man.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's how we did it. But and that was. So it was just warehouses, and next to us would be a mechanic shop, and would be, it was just those type of industrial warehouses that you have in the States. And Rob was with Solstice at the time, and Alex Marquez, and all those guys, and they were just across the way in another warehouse. So we'd hang out. You'd play, and you'd hit warehouse, and if you had time off, you'd go visit them, or they'd come visit us. So it was a small community, especially in Miami. It was a small community, and we ended up in close proximity. So those were your group of friends that you hung out with and had in common,
So how did touring with Cannibal Corpse come about?
Same thing. So we had the relationship, of course, knowing Barrett especially, and knowing the Cannibal guys through the scene, Alex Webster and Paulie, and they were just all really great guys, and we always got along. And Cannibal is pure death metal, but they're proficient players, man. They stay to their. They have a style. They have a style that sells. They have a fan base, which they need to. And I agree. That's them, and they do it. But that doesn't mean they can't play on the side, and that they're into other styles of music. And same thing. Rob Barrett, he's one of those guys that you could pick almost any classic song and tell him, hey, you want to play it, and he'll bust it out right in front of you and start playing it. So we got along with them really well. And it was kind of the same thing. It's going to be a pressure cooker if you don't, type us, and you want to pick someone that you get along with. And they offered us to tour. And of course, it was bittersweet in the sense that we knew that they have a heavier, tougher crowd. But the way we saw it is even at the time, I think today they are the biggest death metal band out there, I think, as far as fan base and people showing up and all that. So for us, it was an opportunity to get exposure, and we knew it was going to be some tough runs in there, but it was a great opportunity, and we got along with them really well. So when they offered, we absolutely jumped at the opportunity.
What was the crowd reaction like?
Mixed, very mixed. Most of the time it wasn't bad. Most of the time it wasn't too bad. A lot of the listeners would. We started with our set. We started with Veil of Maya, so it'd start off heavy, and the pit would get going, and then as soon as we hit that clean part, you'd see people like trip, and then they turn and they look at us and be like, "What the fuck? It's happening here?" And
death metal fans weren't smoking pot back then, I guess.
It's just not enough, I guess, if they were. So, they were just riled up. It was a riled up crowd back then, and back then. It was a harder crowd. It was a harder scene back in the days then. There was a lot of... We played not with the punks. We played with the hardcore, the skinheads. And if they didn't have anywhere to go that night, they came to our shows and, fights. And, so it was a tougher crowd. So we had mixed. Sometimes it was... They would stumble but then kind of give us a chance and listen. Sometimes, like when we played Textures, they were doing faking ballet in the middle of the pit. Sometimes a few times we had bottles thrown at us, or people boo, and then sometimes we had phenomenal reactions. And I would say more than not, we had good, if not better reactions. There were certain areas like Texas was really tough crowd, and they wanted their pure death metal. But then when we got into Berkeley, California, and areas that were maybe had more, or maybe, Berkeley had Berkeley School of Music, and and stuff like that, and we started to see at some of the areas where there was maybe universities and I guess areas where people could be exposed to more music. We would start seeing our own crowd kind of show up. But it was interesting. You would see a group of people standing in front of Reinert, a group of people standing in front of me, in front of Paul, in front of Sean, and they wouldn't be slamming,
Yeah.
The typical musician, arm cross,
Yeah.
you know, just dead staring, watching what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then when you'd stop, they'd clap,
Yeah.
cross their arms, and be like, "Okay, what else you got?" You know.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and I've even had a few instances where after the show they would come up to us with sheet music and say, "Hey, they told us to pick a song for my theory class, so I'm working on whatever song they chose or whatever," and they would ask us theory questions or why we were playing certain things, and so we got like, I think that's a beautiful response and a very it was an honor to have someone come up and actually want to know that type of music. So we had that kind of response to the extreme. Having one time, this guy, I don't know, man, he must have had a good arm on him, but he threw a bottle and caught Teagarden like in the chest or the shoulder, bounced off him, hit Paul in the knee, and then hit me in the foot. It like ricocheted like a rock on the water and caught us, But that was rare. But so we had all extremes, but I would say the most was either accepted or good.
Yeah.
And then in a few tough areas, we did get some boos and some bad responses.
Cool.
So it was mixed.
Okay. When you said musicians really got it, it never dawned on me that most of the people I know who like Cynic are also people in bands or play music. Until you said that, and then I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, that's true. Like I have a hard time selling, and not just Cynic, like Spheres Era, Pestilence, Crone, or bands like that. It's hard to sell it to people who are just, for whatever reason, don't play an instrument.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think it's a level of ear training. I think it's you just naturally when you play, your ear, your level of ear training goes up, and then you can perceive it and you can absorb it faster. And it's funny, there were just hardcore listeners, because there's some people out there that I know which always amaze me. You'll meet that guy that knows every band, knows every song, that knows and does not play a lick of any type of instrument, play nothing. But they give the music time, and they have developed their ear also. But yeah, with our music, I think it just took time to catch on, and it was just really if they would give it the time to give it a few listens. And a lot of people say that it was a little bit before its time. And where I saw about 10 years later, they did the Focus release, and then they did the reunion tour, and that's when it seemed to catch on more.
Yeah.
The first 10 years was a slow run.
Yeah. Well, it was also, you guys were released on a death metal label, touring with death metal bands, and there's never, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's never an opportunity for you to find an audience outside of that, because it was very niche and very specific.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you're pretty versed on the scene, and I'm gonna guess that you've also heard some classic rock and some progressive rock and all that.
Yeah.
Who do you think we could have played with?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a hard run.
And at the time, you could say in retrospect, okay, these 5 bands were all doing something similar at the same time. But at that moment, those 5 bands were not, how does Cynic tour with Atheist when both bands are demo bands, struggling and...
Right, and that was the other problem. I would say Atheist would have been probably the best bands for us to play. Yeah. But as an opening act, your whole goal is to get with someone that's going to bring in an audience that has not heard you, so you have the opportunity for the exposure. So it would have never worked out. Yeah.
So, okay, one last question about Cynic. How did Sean Malone get involved with the band?
So we were already in the studio recording Focus, and at the time, as we mentioned before, Tony Choi decided to stay and tour with Pestilence and all that. So we had recruited Darren McFarland from Atheist, great bass player, great guy, and we were in the studio and we were recording, and it just didn't work out. Without having to get into too much detail, the sound wasn't working, it wasn't working, and we mutually decided to part ways. So we're sitting there, and we're in the studio, we're up against the gun, we're up against the time frame, and we're sitting there talking to Scott Burns, and we're like, listen, man, we know everybody in the industry. We know everybody in the scene here, and we don't have a bass player, and there's no one that fits our style. Yeah. And what are we going to do? And so we're just having a bit of a challenge there. And Scott being an engineer, and he was a big engineer at the time, and he's popular and all that. So as an engineer, you've always got people working in the studio with you, and he has an engineer's assistant. So we're sitting there, and we're just in a slump. It's been a tough run, and we don't have a bass player. And Scott turns, and he points at his assistant engineer, and he goes, "What about this guy?" And that was Sean Malone. Now, Sean was not into death metal. He's a jazz bass player, fretless bass player, prog rock guy, and we were like, we were open, and again, we knew everybody in the scene, and no one worked. So we look at Sean, and now he's been listening to us record this whole album. So he knows what's going on, and of course, probably one of the most talented bass players. I mean, the guy is just, he's a genius on that bass. And we looked at him and we said, "Would you be interested?" And he was like, "Why not?" And his I guess his just the amount of albums he's played on, the guy is just, he'll take it and he'll make it happen. But we didn't know that, of course, so we said, "Okay, listen, man, if you're interested, do you have your bass here by chance?" And he's like, "Always." So he pulls his bass out, and we're like, "Fretless, okay," So we sat down with him, and we started going over the tunes with him and kind of showing him the structures and everything. And within about an hour or two, we were blown away at his ability. And that's an interesting part, because that's really one of your first fretless basses in this style. There was was it Steve DiGiorgio also played fretless too, and all that, and another great bass player. But interestingly enough, Malone and that fretless bass, and it was almost instant for us that we heard it and we're like, that was the missing link. And that is what actually tied, I think, the jazz sound, and in the death metal scene, and with the fretted bass, it's it's very percussive and all that, and the fretless slides into everything, and it's a slidey sound, I guess would be the best thing. And he actually, I think, really melded what we were doing on the jazz side and on the metal side and brought it all together. So complete props to Malone, because we had finished the rhythms, and what was left was the solos, vocals, and the bass tracks. So we said, we're going to take 2 weeks off. We're going to go home and we'll refinish up our solos and get ready for the vocals, and we're going to give him all the music and let him write his stuff. And in 2 weeks, Malone came back, and understand, I think as a guitar player, it's a lot easier. You can play over, you can play within, but as a bass player, you got to be tied to that kick drum. And Reinert's got a crazy kick drum going on there, and within 2 weeks, Sean came back and played the amazing lines that he played on that album. Not being a death metal guy, being a progressive guy, and actually filled the gap for us, and really helped define the Cynic sound. And not many people really know that. And another interesting little tidbit about Malone, I think he may be, I'm not sure exactly how old he is. I thought he was maybe a year or so older than me. So we were recording in 92. I was 22. He was probably 23 at the time, I would think. Sean Malone picked up his first instrument at 17. So by 23, he was playing at that level. Excellent. So the guy's an amazing bass player, but that's an interesting tidbit that not many people knew about how he got on the album and how that happened.
And now he's Dr. Sean Malone.
And now he's Dr. Sean Malone. Can you believe that? That's crazy. Props to him. Great guy.